Welcome back, friends. So we were talking about this a spiritual director. We're talking about reading, especially from the apostolic and patristic time, gives us, as Sarah says, a firm foundation. We become less arrogant, and I have to be honest. I think there's a tremendous arrogance in regards to the sacraments in so many different ways. And once one sees their absolute bedrock place within the early Christian community, that arrogance towards them starts to greatly subside. Um, if you're, a person of goodwill, and that is so. Then, since sacraments are a part of the walk, then we should expect to have it somewhere within the garden, right? There's some aspect, as Sarah was saying, to growing certain things that have to be there, or you're not really engaged with a serious effort for having that thing. And that's true when it comes to the sacraments. And I have linked within the talk here where we talked about, in particular, the Eucharist, but we also took up baptism and confirmation. Um, Confession, I'm sure, was in there somewhere, of what was going on with the early community prior to Constantine, prior to the Nicene Council.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because, we can't not be part of the post-Protestant movement. We are always going to be habitually sandbagged with that element of our history, which, like you said, was a wholesale, I think in some instances, very arrogant reaction toward a sacramental life. And there is a necessary element to each one of those sacraments that even now, as we become a post-baptized, talk about, the destruction that was wrought by the Protestant disobedience. Now we are becoming a post-baptized and really a post-Christian nation who, at least one could say, the Protestants kept baptism, and in some instances kept communion, and in some instances kept confirmation, right? I mean, and marriage, right? These things and I don't know if there would have been sort of a holy orders. I don't know if there would have been any type of real anointing or consecration, but I mean, at least something was kept of those things. But now we are raising a generation who has no connection, either through baptism or, through familial contact to these things, that they become nothing but almost like a mythology, right? That they're not about anything to do with themselves personally. They knew somebody once who was baptized, but for themselves, they have no part in it. And you can see the slow destruction of the spiritual life in the individual person at the same time that we're seeing a very decided destruction of the reality of the human person. The man does not, because man is not grounded in God, in the truth of who he is. Man is losing his grounding in himself, and he's disconnecting himself from, the truth of who he is in this environment. And so he's losing his ecology, right? I mean, to go back to the garden, it'd be as though, you had just sowed salt, right, where water was called for. And you're making it into something else.
That's right. So whether it might be taking stock of figuring out how to have monthly confession, but and again, I know we have friends all across the world in different situations, and we just do the best we can do with where we have. Perhaps a view towards regularizing our marriage within the church. Sarah brought up marriage, and that is true. There is such a widespread destination weddings, weddings in very secular settings, with no more thought of the Lord and its purpose than it's just not there. So wherever you are within your journey, here in the wintertime is really a good time to take advantage. Maybe adoration, right? Reparation. Maybe you're in a stage of life where perhaps you have a little more time and a little more wherewithal in the faith walk, and you can start to offer up your prayer reparation for the
indignities,
sacrilegious outrages and indifferences to the Sacred Immaculate Heart. I mean, that's straight from the angel's mouth,
right.
Our Lady's mouth at Fatima. So, and then.
But it is interesting, you know, I mean, to talk about like this uprootedness, right? I mean, you know, to draw a further analogy from the plant, if the sacraments are the fertile ground that can sustain our roots, right? That if you don't have them, or you uproot yourself from them, you specifically choose to remove yourself from them, you become the branch that is no longer grafted onto the tree. And you can't by your own self bring yourself back to life. It's just not possible. That, and anyone would be able to know that if you just went through and yanked up all of your tomato plants, you know, and pulled them out. I know that I keep beating the dead horse of the tomato plant, the poor thing. I'm sure that there are cucumbers and, you know, and other things that I could be referring to, but I think I like tomatoes best. But if you did that, you would never expect for it to be able to maintain itself in life or to bring forth fruit. So there is an element of ourselves that in the same way that a tree or a plant or a flower has to be rooted in solid earth to be able to bring forth its best fruits, we have to make sure that we too are recognizing that we ourselves, to bring forth the most beautiful fruits or spiritual gifts that our Lord wants us to be the conduit of, we must anchor ourselves in a firm foundation and in a fertile ground, and that is what the sacraments are. They are I mean, they're a paradise, right? They themselves contain all the necessary elements of paradise within them.
That's right. And we see within the early church, and I mean from our Blessed Lord's resurrection, those 40 days before his ascension, where he is teaching the apostles the rubrics for the liturgy, and they will go out in the various apostolic endeavors, and you'll see that the liturgy, how they celebrate, is in its nascent form the same. And it is real clear that it is not, as Sarah said, it's not a me and Jesus thing. Right. So this notion that we are a self-project within the Lord, when you see what the early church endured under persecution, under very bigotry, under all kinds of calumny, you get this sense that somewhere in this garden of planning, a rich sacramental life has to be there. And from that sacramental life, and that is the order, you get these acts of charity, right, volunteering, because that too would be within the spiritual walk, because it's, you know, with love of God, love of neighbor. And within that giving to the neighbor, the concept of tithing comes in. But it's out of that rich, fertile bedrock foundation, your soil, that your plants are, you know, have. That's the sacraments are the same to the spiritual life, which gives rise to love of nature in its many, many forms, where, that again would come into the winter planning time to decide, can I do this? Is this type of charity called of me? What does tithing look like to me at this time?
Mhm.
You have a presupposition of sacramentality.
Right. I think it's interesting too, because it also goes without saying that, so many people in the modern generation, have basically ripped their children out of the ground, right? And then they curse them when they bring forth no fruit in the future. So what loving gardener would yank up his pear tree and let it try and put down its own roots somewhere without and then curse it for not bearing fruit for him? I mean, there's a recognition that the gardener has an obligation to the plant that he is nurturing, to give it the depth of a foundation that is necessary to its vertical growth, right, or to its bearing fruit. But so many people in this modern in this world right now are absolutely forbidding to their own children a proper foundation. They won't bring their children to be baptized. They won't teach them to go to confession. They won't go to mass on Sunday. And then when these poor little these little saplings, right, when they watch them dying in sin, they curse them for the fact that they're not better than they ought to have been. I mean, it's such a hypocrisy on our own part that we think that our children can live off of a virtue when they have nothing that is fortifying it, no habituated action of goodness, no. I read this article, which I know maybe is a little bit tangential, but I do think that there's something here that pertains to this. That, once upon a time, little girls would have been given dolls, right? And that doll would have looked like a baby. This is multi-generational, right? I mean, you can go back into like the times of the pharaohs, and you can find like artifacts of dolls that little children would have had, that these little girls would have played with, right? And they would have inspired in these young little girls this natural inclination towards nurturing, of giving of themselves to something other than themselves. But if we look now at the modern dolls that we are parading before our children, they are icons of narcissism. There's nothing about any of these modern dolls that would make you want to nurture anything. It's all navel gazing. And so what we have done is we are and then, when we get old, right, us getting old, we've raised our children to have no natural inclinations towards nurturing. They don't bring forth any fruit, right? They don't have children. They become very, very selfish. And so when we're old, we have no consolation from them because they were never given the anchor that they need. And so these gardens that we are planting, like you said before, they're not about us, right? That relationship, it's not a strictly linear relationship between us and Christ. There is an element of this garden that bespeaks community, right? I mean, one seed can bring forth enough food to feed 10. Right? There's a presupposition that in this movement that we are going to be doing what we need that is necessary for ourselves, but being able to engage with the other. And the same is true within the spiritual life. You don't have this relationship with Christ for its own, I mean, you do for its own sake, but not for your sake alone. You engage in this relationship, this growth in your spiritual life, so that you can become the conduit of grace for more than just yourself.
That's right. All right, my friends, then we're going to pick up with a last important part of gardening in the next episode. Till then, Fides de Ratio.